Hello everybody, it's a Vertical Sandwich. Welcome back to Book Reviews. Okay, so today we're going to do boom, boom, right here. This is a thing. This is Neil Gaiman's American Gods. This is the only book that won the Hugo Award, the Nebula Award, and the Bram Stoker Award, which is kind of nuts. So, some of you may be familiar, I believe that there's an Amazon series based on this book. I haven't watched it. I don't really kind of do that thing. I just don't. I think the only thing I ever watched, the only series I ever watched on the web was Ash vs. the Evil Dead, and that's because Evil Dead. So yes, this is our second book by Neil Gaiman. Our first was Graveyard Book. Neil Gaiman, of course, is most famous for his work in kind of the comic graphic novel genre. But he's won 2 Hugo Awards, which is impressive, right? So, Graveyard Book was more of written as if it was a children's book. I don't believe it's a children's book. I think it actually is considered like a children's book. It's not. It starts with a serial killing, but and again, before you correct me, I looked it up. It's Neil Gaiman. There's actually a video on YouTube. Neil Gaiman tells you how to pronounce Neil Gaiman. So. So this is his book, American Gods. And the general premise, well, let's read the back. Shadow is a man with a past, but now he wants nothing more than to live a quiet life with his wife and stay out of trouble, until he learns that she's been killed in a terrible accident. Flying home for the funeral as a violent storm rocks the plane, a strange man in the seat next to him introduces himself. The man calls himself Mr. Wednesday, and he knows more about Shadow than is possible. He warns Shadow that a far bigger storm is coming, and from that moment on, nothing will ever be the same. Okay, general premise is this. So if belief exists, it creates a god, right? Anywhere there are believers, gods exist. But they are geographically separated. So what happens is people immigrate to America, and then they bring old world gods, and then belief kind of falls out as they become American, because Americans are really bad at worshiping things. So, there's an American version of Kali who has very few followers, but then there's also an Indian version of Kali who's incredibly well, worshipped. And they are two different things. They are aware of one another. So I'm going to reveal, Mr. Wednesday in here is the American version of Odin. And so he doesn't have a lot of followers anymore in America. Now, there clearly is a Norse Odin. And he actually is also at some point in the novel. These are not gigantic spoilers here. Whereas in America, the things that we have worshipped are things like technology, television, and so those gods exist and are powerful. Now, the idea that Christ is in this kind of pantheon and fails in the Middle East and stuff is very briefly discussed. Christ is not a character in this novel, but by the rules of the novel, a very powerful Christ figure in America must exist. And that stuff is kind of... So the gods that are dealt with in here are gods from immigrant cultures that belief is failing in them, and Odin is kind of going around, and he has an idea. He has a thing that's gonna he is getting ready to defend himself to try to take back the world, or help them survive against the coming threat of American gods, things like technology and media, and yeah. So, and it's very strange. It's very strange that there are these these Egyptian gods that are tending a funeral home in some Illinois town. It's stuff like that. So, and and they look like people. They all just look like people. So, the part I'm going to read to you about this is, American places of worships are like tourist traps. And so the first part of this book, they journey to the House on the Rock in Spring Green, Wisconsin, a place I've been to multiple times. It is an hour drive from my house. So to ride the world's largest carousel, because that's a thing of worship. Now, Neil Gaiman clearly went to House on the Rock at one point, and I don't recommend that. It's interesting. It's a strange place if you want to see giant collections of craziness, but they get it completely right. Like, you read this and you go, oh, somebody went to House on the Rock and took notes. So, and they get on the carousel, which you're not allowed to ride. The book makes a big deal about that. You're not allowed to ride the carousel, and you're not. It's like the world's largest indoor carousel, but you can't ride it. So I'm going to read the back of Chapter 5, the last section of Chapter 5, and then start Chapter 6. So they get on the carousel, and he goes, "Then the lights went out, and Shadow saw the gods. One moment Shadow was riding the world's largest carousel, holding on to his eagle-headed tiger, and then the red and white lights of the carousel stretched and shivered and went out, and he was falling through an ocean of stars where the mechanical waltz was replaced by a pounding rhythmic roll and crash, as of cymbals or the breakers on the shores of a far ocean. The only light was starlight, but it illuminated everything with a cold clarity. Beneath him his mount stretched and padded, its warm fur under his left hand, its feathers beneath his right. It's a good ride, isn't it? The voice came from behind him, in his ears, and in his mind. Shadow turned, slowly streaming images of himself as he moved, frozen moments, each him captured in a fraction of a second, every tiny movement lasting for an infinite period. The images that reached his mind made no sense. It was like seeing the world through the multifaceted, jeweled eyes of a dragonfly, but each facet saw something completely different, and he was unable to combine the things he was seeing, or thought he was seeing, into a whole that made any sense. He was looking at Mr. Nancy, an old black man with a pencil mustache, in his check sports jacket and his lemon yellow gloves, riding a carousel lion as it rose and lowered high in the air, and at the same time, in the same place, he saw a jeweled spider as high as a horse, its eyes an emerald nebula, strutting, staring down at him, and simultaneously he was looking at an extraordinarily tall man with teak-colored skin and 3 sets of arms, wearing a flowing ostrich feather headdress, his face painted with red stripes, riding an irritated golden lion, 2 of his 6 hands holding on tightly to the beast's mane. And he was also seeing a young black boy dressed in rags, his left foot all swollen and crawling with black flies. And last of all, and behind all these things, Shadow was looking at a tiny brown spider hiding under a withered ochre leaf. Shadow saw all these things, and he knew they were the same thing. "If you don't close your mouth," said the many things that were Mr. Nancy, "something's gonna fly in there." Shadow closed his mouth and swallowed hard. There was a wooden hall on a hill a mile or so from them. They were trotting towards the hall, their mounts' hooves and feet padding noiselessly on the dry sand at the sea's edge. Cernobog trotted up on his centaur. He tapped the human arm of his mount. "None of this is truly happening," he said to Shadow. He sounded miserable. "It's all in your head. Best not to think of it." Like, yeah, it's that kind of fun. These guys are running around. They're hanging out with this ex-convict. The ex-convict is being paid to kind of protect them, maybe lay down his life if he has to. That's part of the deal. He gets in a bar fight with a leprechaun at one point. Like, it's very strange and fun. There's a level of joy in the way Neil Gaiman deals with ideas. Right? Like, ideas are his toys. And you just kind of go like, seriously, they're riding the carousel at House of the Rock. It takes them to this, this longhouse in some spirit land. And then there are places like there's a mixture of things because, see, the thing about it is one of the things that they keep saying throughout the course of the novel is that America is a really horrible place for gods. Like, the old world is very good at kind of keeping its traditions and taking them seriously, and America is horrible that way. We throw things away and we find new things. We want to play with new toys, and we want to replace our old things with kind of new things, and we don't make a distinction. So there are people like Odin here, and people like, Christ and technology, and then culture heroes like Paul Bunyan, who are all kind of in the same pantheon of believable figures, like things that we have faith or worship, like things that we spend our time thinking about. It's an understandable concept for us. I mean, if you think about the things you care about, I mean, if you're on this channel for video gaming, then maybe that's a thing you spend a lot of time doing. If you're me right now, I mean, books. It's just like I'm going through multiple novels a week at this point. I just can't. I just ordered 19 new books. And those things, there's no distinction between those things and, Kali and Vishnu and these kind of other, Horus and these kind of old world gods. And then there are also things like at one point somebody is talking about technology and how technology is this kind of powerful, force to be reckoned with, and somebody is like, yeah, but think about the railroads 100 years ago, like how powerful they were, and now they're, now they're struggling to get by, and it's like, that's the fickleness of the belief system of Americans, which is, the central theme of the book, right, is that we are, as a people, what we lack is a tradition of those kind of values. We have traditions of other values, but the idea of kind of worship and ceremony are a thing that we're culture poor in, and that's, I think it's, I mean, that's maybe a fair assessment. I mean, it's coming from, first off, we are young and we are a very mixed culture, so I mean, we don't have, we have that as a disadvantage, but I'm not going to apologize for what Neil Gaiman thinks of American culture. All I'm saying is that his assessment rings true, right? That the things that we care about are not these kind of steeped in, multiple generation, like long generational traditions. And especially when it comes to things like traditional religions. And, you can deride any modern technological culture for that, right? Is that there's, there are 1,000-year-old worship traditions in England or France or, and like those things will always be failing in the face of whatever you have to look at every day to survive. So yeah, it's an interesting concept to play with, and Gaiman plays with it. He just plays with it, and it's fun. You like Shadow. It did ring to me, though, that there is actually a similar book by Clive Barker. There were some things about the Damnation game that rang kind of true, with this prisoner getting out of prison, getting a job for the supernatural being as a bodyguard, and then kind of being haplessly pulled into this kind of fight between good and evil. And I don't know, I read the Damnation game when I was in like junior high school, but there are superficial similarities. I'm not accusing Neil Gaiman of ripping off the Damnation game, which I know has to be older because I read it before this book was written. But they did strike me as going like, oh, again, it's not a bad plot point, right? Like the idea that criminals get out and have to start a new life, and like those lives could be, bizarrely supernatural. If that's the thing you have on the surface and that's it, that's not. It's not a plagiarism of ideas. It's just weird that it's the second book I read where that's kind of the structure of the main character. So I loved it. I liked it. I had a ton of fun with it. It was after Graveyard Book. It was not what I expected from Neil Gaiman's novel, and that was a good thing. The Graveyard Book was fine, but this was really, really well done, and I really liked it. If you like the Amazon series, if you're watching that or whatever the web series is about it, read the book because the book's good. I can't speak to the series. If you haven't watched the series, read the book because the book is good. I can't speak to the series. If you like Neil Gaiman's other books, read this book. It's good. I mean, I can't speak to the other books. But yeah, so boom, 2002, the only book to win Hugo, Nebula, and Bram Stoker Award. So, I mean, at least thus far. So yeah, I would strongly suggest this book. I had a lot of fun with it. I think the author had a lot of fun with it. I genuinely enjoyed it. I don't have a lot to say aside from the fact that the concept is wonderful. And Gaiman pulls it off really well. And the characters are great. Like, you really care about the characters. The gods and the people. Like, the people that are introduced, there's only like 3 of them. But you care. You genuinely want to see what happens to them. And actually, there might only be 2. And, yeah. So, check it out. It's just a ton of fun. Like, I really like the concept, and I really like where he went with it. So, with that, I will leave you with a roaring endorsement of American Gods by Neil Gaiman. Bye, everybody.